Hello. Welcome to the first webinar in our series on surveys. Thank you so much for joining us. This webinar series was developed and is being presented by staff from the Evaluation Center at the University of Colorado, Denver. And this work is being funded by the State Tobacco Education Prevention Program, STEPP, at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. There are two presenters today. My name is Erica Clark, and I'm an evaluation specialist at the Evaluation Center. And I've been here since last November, and before that I worked as a public health evaluator for about 9 years. And my colleague is Peter, and he'll say hello now.
Hello, my name is Peter Rumbach, and I'm also with the Evaluation Center, and I'm an evaluation specialist, and I've been here for about 2 years. So I just want to start off by giving a little orientation to our platform that we're using, which is Zoom. So at the bottom of your screen, if you hover with your cursor, you'll see different functions, including the ability to chat during the webinar. You'll also see a video and audio button, and both of those are muted, and we just ask that you keep those muted by not clicking them. If you click on the video, it will show your, if you have a webcam, it'll show your face on the recording, so we just ask you to go ahead and keep that muted. If you're not connected by audio, you can connect by clicking the bottom icon on the left of the phone, and that should allow you options to connect. We'd also like to know how many folks are participating, so if you could please click on the chat icon and type your name, the name of your organization, and also if you're not a STEPP grantee, go ahead and type the name of the STEPP grantee that you work with. That would be great. If you have more than one person in the room who is participating, go ahead and type the names of multiple people. Great, it looks like some folks are already typing their name and their organizations. If you have questions throughout the webinar, you can go ahead and type your questions here. We'll try to answer questions as we go along, as well as at the end we'll have some time to address any questions that we don't get to. All right, so this webinar is the first in a series of 3 on surveys. The next 2 will be next Friday. And then we also have 2 additional series, one on qualitative data, which will be in September of this year, and one on presenting results, which will be in January of next year. The TA content was developed based on a needs assessment of STEPP grantees, and webinars will be presented live on the dates shown. And we'll be doing registration for subsequent series in the future.
Great. So today's webinar has 3 intended outcomes. At the end of this webinar, you'll be able to identify when survey data collection is appropriate, develop a survey map, and prepare a quality survey instrument. Of course, there are both advantages and disadvantages of using surveys. I'll jump right into some of the advantages. Surveys are useful when you want to gain the perspective of a lot of people. Survey administration is quick and efficient. Surveys allow you to ask specific standardized questions, and the results are quantifiable. Some drawbacks to using surveys are low response rates. Response rates can be low due to many reasons, such as poor promotion or lack of access or time of the respondents, or survey fatigue, where there's a lot of surveys out in your community and it's just getting kind of lost in the shuffle. Survey results can be hard to interpret based on a single item without examples, or if the sample is not representative. And quality surveys take time and expertise to prepare and analyze the data, and it especially takes a lot of time at the front end in order to design and plan a good survey.
So there are some questions that you might want to ask yourself before you develop a survey. Is it possible other agencies or organizations have developed survey instruments that could be useful to learn about, adapt, or even use in their entirety? If you research and find existing tools, you should ask yourself first, what's the purpose of the instrument? Does that purpose align with our purpose for conducting the survey? Can the instrument be adapted to fit our purpose if it doesn't fit completely? And do we need permission to use that instrument? There are some benefits of using existing surveys. They often have a higher reliability and validity as they were developed by professional researchers, and you have the possibility of having comparison data. So some examples of where you might find existing survey instruments are through government agencies or academic institutions. For example, the CDC or through Google Scholar. There are some other good questions to ask yourself as well. Considering your primary evaluation or research question first is a good place to start. What do you want to know, and will survey data help you to learn this? Next, think about what a typical respondent will look like. How might the type of information you collect differ depending on who your audience is? And then finally, what type of survey, online, paper, or phone, would be most effective at collecting responses? How long will respondents have to complete the survey, so you can think about the length? The first step in developing your survey is to develop a survey blueprint. And this is a way to build an overview of your instrument. It includes broad categories and topics within those categories. It gives you the 10,000-foot view before you start choosing and developing actual survey items. So here's a blueprint example. First, let's think about our research question. So for this example, we're going to do something that most people, I think everyone knows about, and many people like them, cookies. So our research question might be something like, what are the behaviors and attitudes of cookie consumers and makers? First, let's think about what some broad categories of information you might want to think about. So these are not actual survey items. Maybe cookie eating behaviors, attitudes toward cookies, cookie making behaviors, and some demographic information. What demographic information, if any, are needed to make sense of your results? We caution you to think about why you want this information and how you will use it. If it is absolutely necessary for analysis, then you should include it. So for example, with our research question, if we are interested in knowing the the geographic differences for our different respondents, then we want to collect information in our demographic section on geographic information. It's also important to share your ideas back with your team to ensure that you've identified all of the big ideas. You may also consider gaining feedback from target audiences to ensure your categories are inclusive. Additionally, looking at other instruments in the field is a way to understand what broad categories have been studied. This can give you insight into what you may also want to include, or assure that you have covered the primary categories you want to cover. Now that we have our broad categories, it's time to think about what topics within these categories we want to include. So remember, we're not writing survey questions yet. We're only thinking about the topics that you want to learn more about. So here are some examples of how we might divide our categories into topics. You may also consider having your team or others look at your topics to see if there are additional areas that you hadn't thought about. Once you have identified your categories and topics, you can start to develop your specific items. Here's an example of what a blueprint might look like. On the far left, you have your broad categories, followed by a column that includes the topics within those categories. Then on the right, we have the number of survey items that we want to include per topic and per category, and the actual survey items that we've written. Your blueprint should also include an overall timeline for survey development, including administration, analysis, and dissemination. So for example, we plan to spend July developing our instrument, August to administer the survey, and September for analysis and dissemination. This timeline is a planning document that you can use to track progress and adjust your work.
Once you have your survey blueprint, you can begin to write your survey questions. Next, I'll go over different kinds of survey questions. There are two general kinds of question types, open or closed. Open questions allow for the respondent to answer the question in their own words. See the example above on the left. how do you feel about cookies as a dessert? In contrast, closed questions have response options built into the question that the respondent must use to answer it. On the right is an example of a closed question. Rate how you feel about having a cookie for dessert. And there's a scale, dislike to like. So in the next couple slides, I'm going to share the few types of closed questions. This is an example of a rating question. Survey questions like this are often referred to as Likert scales. But technically, a Likert scale is a series of survey items that examine different dimensions of a single theory or construct. This rating question has 5 levels, which is useful to provide enough differentiation in the responses. And so there should be enough response options so that most people will be able to respond. The appropriate number of response options will depend on your audience. For example, for younger children, if you are doing a survey with them, you might want to use only 3 levels to make it easier. So there are 2 types of rating or Likert scales. These are bidirectional scales and anchored. In this bidirectional scale, you have 2 extremes, strongly disagree and strongly agree. When you prepare selecting your survey items, it's important to think about how you'll report your results. Different scales allow for different types of analysis. So if you use a bidirectional scale with each option labeled, as in the first rating scale we saw just on the previous slide, you would report descriptive statistics such as the percentage of responses per each response option. With the anchored scale, you see only low and high anchors labeled. So at the left we have no confidence, and at the right extremely confident. So for analysis, you might report means because intervals on the scale are considered to be equal. And we'll cover analyzing survey data in a later webinar, but we just wanted to touch on it here and mention it as you're designing your survey. And also, just to note, there are varying opinions in the field on what kinds of analysis you can do on these different types of scales. Here's an example of a multiple choice survey item. This is a good example in that it has 5 response options and a variety of options that are specific and easy for the person to answer the question. And when analyzing these types of questions, you would report the frequency or the percentages of responses for each of the 5 response options. This is an example of a ranking question. It allows you to gain feedback on multiple aspects of a single point. That is, if you want to learn about something like importance of ingredients and you're able to create a matrix that collects information easily on these different ingredients in this cookie example. So in this grid format, it's easy for the respondent to complete since they're using the same scale to respond to each item.
All right, and the third step in developing your survey, there are a series of best practices you can follow to assure your questions are correctly understood and capture accurate data consistently across respondents. So the first is activate recall. Recall questions can be problematic. You're asking respondents to remember something, and we don't always remember things very well. So one way to activate respondents' recall is to identify a specific time or ask multiple questions about the events that led up to an activity. So in this example, we have thinking about the last time you made cookies from scratch, to what extent did you follow a recipe? This helps the respondent to think about the last time that they actually made cookies in answering this item. The next best practice is to provide mutually exclusive options. There should not be categories of responses that overlap. Each option should be exclusive from all others. In this example, on the poor scale, you can see that A, B, and C all overlap. The better option is to have A, B, C, D, and E, in which all of the responses are mutually exclusive from each of the others. Here are 4 main types of don'ts for writing survey items. So don't write leading questions or unbalanced scales. Don't write double-barreled questions. Don't include jargon in your items, and don't use negatives in your questions. So I'm going to provide an example of a poor survey item and how we might correct it for each of these. So the first, using an unbalanced scale, if we take a look at this example, we can see that A is really the only negative option within our set of 4 responses. If you're using a bidirectional scale, it's important to use an equal number of negative and positive points. This is important for analysis, understanding, and interpreting your results. So we might change the scale to look something like this, where we have an equal number of negative and positive, and we've also included a neutral point in the middle. Next, for double-barreled items, or those that ask a respondent to provide an answer to more than one thing, make sure your items only ask about one thing. In this example, a respondent may have trouble answering because his or her feelings about eating and baking cookies could be different. A response here would not accurately capture feelings about either of those actions because you would not know to which action the respondent was referring. So it's an easy fix. If you feel that both of these actions are important to include and capture data on in your survey, you can separate them out into 2 items. So in this example, we fixed it by only asking about the action of eating cookies. So for the use of jargon, respondents may not know in this example what artisan ingredients are. So it's important to help avoid this by providing specific examples of the types of artisan ingredients, or avoid using the term altogether. So in this example, we've changed to add the examples of vanilla bean paste and almond flour as types of artisan ingredients to help the respondent understand what we're referring to. And finally, avoiding the use of negatives in your items. Negatives can be confusing for a respondent to figure out how the scale interacts with the negative from the item. And so this is an easy fix for this one. We just take out the negative, so we know that the respondent understands what they're answering.
So to summarize, these are the survey do's. Be brief, be objective, be simple, be specific, and be consistent. So how can this question be improved? If you'd like, please type in one issue or survey don't that you see as problematic in this question in the chat box. I'll wait a moment to see if anyone wants to put in some issues they're noticing. That's great. Somebody mentioned that there are too many parts to the question. That's right. Yeah, too many questions within the question. It's double-barreled. It's triple-barreled. There's jargon, right? We have the artisan ingredients in there. And they're inconsistent answers. Great. So you're right. It's not brief, simple, or specific. The question is double-barreled, making it difficult for the respondent to answer. And the response options are not mutually exclusive and not in any sensible order that make it easier for the respondent to answer. So here's our better question. The question's briefer, simpler to understand, and more specific. There's no jargon, and there's unbalanced scale, and options that were the response options used an unbalanced scale, and the options were not mutually exclusive. Or now they are mutually exclusive. Excuse me.
All right, great. So that was the first short webinar on survey development. And so we just want to reference our website, which is steppeval.org. And on this website, you can find resources for survey development, and these include a checklist for survey do's and don'ts, University of Wisconsin's Manual on Survey Fundamentals, which includes many of the things that we talked about today and goes more in depth into some specific issues. And then there's also a link to a blog that features 7 online survey platforms. There's a variety of free and paid types of online platforms out there, so you can take a look at that. In addition, we've created a community forum on our website, and that's a place where for each of the different webinars you can post any follow-up questions that you have or post anything that you want to discuss with the community. On the website, you'll need to register to leave your comments or questions there, and we will be monitoring that as well to help answer any questions.
Great, so the next 2 webinars in this series will be held consecutively next Friday from 10 to 10:30 and then 10:30 to 11. And if you only registered for this webinar but would like to participate in our next one, just send me an email, erica.clark@ucdenver.edu, and we will have 2 separate web links that will go out, and we'll open those consecutively next Friday.
And additionally, for today's webinar, will also be recorded, and we'll be posting that on our website along with the PowerPoint slides. The PowerPoint slides do include our email addresses if you want to send any follow-up messages. So we just want to end by asking that if there are any questions. I didn't see any questions as we went along in the chat box, but if anyone has any questions now, please feel free to type those in the chat box. All right, so it looks like we have one question. I noticed the qualitative webinar is September 16th. That's Public Health in the Rockies Conference. Any chance you can change the date? Okay, so we can talk to our team here to see if the dates there might be able to change. It sounds like that might be something that many of the participants would be going to, and so wouldn't be available for that date. So we'll definitely thank you for pointing that out, Christine. We'll make a note of that, and we will let you know in a follow-up email about what date we settled on. Okay, any other questions? All right, sounds good. Well, it looks like those were all the questions that we had. So we'll go ahead and just encourage you, if you do have follow-up questions, to go to the website, register for the community forum, and document your questions there, and we can address them. If you have any other questions you want answered that aren't about survey development, you can contact Erica Clark or myself here at the Evaluation Center. So thank you, everyone, for participating today. We appreciate your time. Have a good Friday and have a good weekend.